Just a brief introduction to our speaker today. Jess Kirby is an assistant professor in the Health Sciences Department at UCCS. Dr. Kirby's research focuses on exploring the sport and physical activity experiences of individuals across the lifespan, as well as the impact of social connection and peer relationships on psychological well-being in sport and physical activity settings. She specializes in qualitative and arts-based research methods, including narrative, ethnography, portraiture, and research poetry. Dr. Kirby is the director of the new Mountain Lion Strong program on campus, aimed at supporting the well-being, resilience, and mental health of all UCCS student athletes. She currently serves as a graduate program coordinator for health promotion, assistant director for the Center for Critical Sports Studies, and the faculty advisor for the UCCS Fitness Studies program.
Thank you, Melissa. Morning. Thank you all for braving the weather and being here with interest and engagement. I really appreciate it. I did think it was maybe 50-50 that it would be an empty room, and that would be okay. And thank you everyone who's online and safe and warm at home as well. So excited to talk to you today about my ethics fellowship project that I did around youth sport, primarily focused on the importance of athlete autonomy and athlete well-being, beginning at the youth sport level. As Melissa mentioned, I'm the director for our Mountain Lion Strong program, which is NCAA Innovations in Research and Practice Grant program, focused on really supporting student athlete mental health. But we can do so much better in that arena if we start at the youngest ages of our first introduction to sport and build that healthy foundation as athletes move on up. So today we'll talk a little bit about the Daniels Ethics Fund Initiative principles to kind of ground that, a little bit about our experiences in sport, that importance of autonomy for athletes of every age, how that can be applied with an ethical frame to help parents and coaches, and kind of what we did in the class setting for this project specifically. So for anyone who may be not familiar or less familiar, these are the principles that frame the Daniels Fund Ethics Initiative. So we have the principles of integrity, trust, accountability, transparency, fairness, respect, rule of law, and viability. And these apply very heavily to the sport setting at every developmental level. So just keep those in mind in our back pocket as we have our discussions today. So I'd like to start with a little conversation and activity, thinking about what our most salient, favorite, or maybe meaningful or memorable sport experiences are. So how many of you have had sport experiences in your lifetime of any kind? Great. So with the spirit of engagement, what I'd like to do is start with about a 5-minute partner activity. So I'd like you to talk about 3 things. One, what's your favorite sport memory? One that really immediately evokes joy and excitement right off the bat. Secondly, what is a memory that is not your favorite? Maybe that you remember sadness, frustration, or disappointment. And thirdly, what are the main characters of that memory? Okay, so take about 5 minutes and chat with one another. And online, if you'd like to share some things in the chat with one another, and then we'll get back together and discuss. So some of those sport memories that brought us joy. Can you share a few examples of those?
Well, I had so much fun playing sports growing up. Skiing, of course, soccer, all through the years, all the time.
Yeah.
Since I was 6, and then track later in high school. Just being with friends, and outside.
Great, perfect. 1 or 2 other examples of joyful memories.
I was a figure skater, and not a specific memory, but just the notion of just kind of flying. I just loved going fast and feeling it.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's excellent. One more example.
I think winning is just fun.
I don't know, being in a state competition,
Yeah.
conference championships.
Yeah, it is an achievement setting, so that's a really good part. Excellent. With that, who are some of the main characters, so to speak, that came to mind in those happy memories? Christina mentioned fun with friends. What else? What about in the competitive mindset? What were some main characters?
Mates, coaches.
Yeah. Good. Awesome. What about some memories of disappointment, frustration, or sadness? What's a couple of examples that we took this guy?
Losing state football by a point.
Yeah, the heartbreakers, truly, right? Absolutely.
Being purposely dropped from the pyramid and cheer team and just getting it dropped.
That's something that we will ever not forget.
I had to quit. Like my safety was no longer guaranteed.
I'm sorry to hear that. And there was probably similar people for those as well. So most people have these experiences. Some have really positive experiences that last years and decades. And that kind of leads to a lifelong positive relationship with sport. And sometimes we have really negative experiences like you were willing to share with us, which I appreciate. And that really puts a mark and can really change our relationship with sport for the rest of our life. So let's take a look at some other things we see specifically in youth sport.
Oh, I see a lot of new faces here. Who wants to go first?
Hi, I'm Jill. I'm a recovering soccer mom.
Hi, Jill.
Ever since Bailey was 5, I've been driving her to early morning practices, after school games, weekend tournaments, summer camps, indoor winter league, Spratum League.
Spratum?
Spring/autumn. I lived in my van, never saw my husband, but it was okay because my sacrifice was making Bailey a better player.
But we encourage our kids to play sports so they become better people.
Tell that to the little brats, huh? Who play other sports during the rest of the year and then steal all the spots on the soccer team?
Perhaps those kids are better athletes because they play other sports?
That makes no sense. Bailey is out there every day, kicking the ball until her feet are numb.
You say that like it's a good thing.
And then one day out of nowhere, Bailey tells me that she doesn't want to play soccer anymore. She can't even look at a soccer ball after all the years I put in.
How old is Bailey now?
Going on 7, why?
When a child plays only one sport, sometimes they have a higher risk of suffering repetitive injuries. They can burn out and they get turned off sports altogether.
I found myself at 5 o'clock in the morning the other day, sitting in the van, and I realized I'm not a soccer mom anymore.
Encourage Bailey to try different sports.
So I shouldn't have sold the van.
All right, would anyone else like to share?
Hi, I'm Todd.
Hi, Todd.
I bet the farm on my son playing in the NBA. Literally, I took out a second mortgage on the family farm to pay for basketball camps. Things were looking great for a while. Justin made varsity in middle school, but then
Did he get injured?
worse. He stopped growing. He's 5'5". Genetics is a cruel mistress. I can't even look my own son in the eye now, and it's not because he's so darn little.
Is it because you're going to lose the farm?
No, because he's playing on the JV team.
But is he having fun?
I never asked.
Maybe you should, Todd.
We're with you, Todd. As a parent, you just want to see your child succeed.
Our Daniel could have played in the NHL. Went to all the day camps, straight into night camp, hockey school, hockey.
Hockey?
Twice the hockey and no school.
We thought he was the next Wayne Gretzky. He wasn't even the next Brent Gretzky. Hasn't been on skates in 15 years.
Early sports specialization can actually hurt a child's overall athletic development. And by encouraging their son to only play hockey, they may have actually hurt his chances for succeeding. But what is Daniel doing now?
David doesn't like to speak about it.
It might help to share.
He's my son is an astronaut. I still have all his hockey gear.
He still keeps his skates sharpened.
He's still draft eligible.
He's 34 years old.
Gordie Howe played until he's 50.
You need to get over it.
I know.
Admitting it is the first step. How about you? Would you like to share?
I'm Wade. I'm only here because my son made me.
And why is that?
He says I'm trying to live vicariously through him.
Is that true? Right. Well, let's all remember why we encourage our kids to play sports.
To win.
To be a star.
To get rich.
We encourage our kids to play sports so they can have fun and socialize and learn to be part of a team. Is forcing our child to play only one sport and then putting a whole lot of pressure on them to succeed a really healthy thing to do?
No.
Good. Repeat after me. Kids who play more than one sport get more out of sports. Kids who play more than one sport get more out of sports.
So it's a great video, one of my favorites. Obviously satire, however, there's a bit more truth in it than satire, unfortunately. And also making note that it's made in Nova Scotia and not in the United States. So it's more a reality than satire, unfortunately, in our sports system. A lot of things are touched on there in terms of why kids play sports or why we want them to play sports. They mentioned, are they having fun? I don't know, I didn't ask them, right? So really centering on that athlete autonomy piece. Are the kids there or are they there because you want them to be there? The parents that want to live vicariously through their child, or the parents that really hang their hat of work and success for themselves as parents on what their children choose to do and end up succeeding at, is actually really prevalent. There's a lot of research in youth sport where parents, you could reliably predict parents' own personal moral worth was directly correlated, statistically significant to their child's success in sport. And so that's not what we want to see is, kind of parents finding their moral worth or sense of accomplishment as a parent in their child's success in these things. It also touches on several ethical components, mainly early sport specialization, right? And our kind of misplaced idea of talent development, right? That just because you have a tall kid in middle school doesn't mean they're always going to be a tall kid, and not really having that good knowledge base across the sport of how growth and puberty and development and things like that works. Missing a lot of kids who miss out on sport because they develop and grow late, and then kind of over selecting the kids that grow earlier, but may not necessarily be the best athletes or may burn out a lot sooner because they were chosen so quickly, so early, so young. So lots of things there that we'll discuss. So why do kids play sports? So we have tons and tons of research on this and it's very consistent. So when we ask kids, go out there and ask kids, we talk to kids, we give them surveys, why do kids play sports? And they say they play sports.
With their friends.
Yep, that's always number one of two reasons. Well, they're tied. What's the number one reason do you think? Huh? Have fun with friends. Here, they want to have fun with their friends, learn new things. Very, very consistent. You see that, right? Kids are not out there to win trophies or win championships. That very much comes from and is socialized from the adults. And so fun or enjoyment, so a little bit of foundation in motivation and social psychology, which is my area of expertise. Doing something because you chose to do and you enjoy it and find value in the activity is the key ingredient for internally regulated motivation, right? Something that we find long-term value in, that it's easy to pour a lot of time and hard work and commitment to in because I chose it, I love it, I see myself in this activity, I get fulfillment from it. So that's where that autonomy really comes in. Is autonomy isn't doing things independently, it's having the choice. Having the choice to do what we love and commit to challenges within that space. And so kids really do choose to play typically for that reason. Now we do have the cases where kids get signed up by their parents, get dropped off at practice, they're maybe off on the side picking dandelions and they're not really sure why they're there. Right? That's what we would call amotivation. They're just there because they got signed up and dropped off, but that's not their choice or necessarily their idea of fun. So what we have in the United States that was really alluded to in satire in the video is the professionalization of youth sport. Youth sport last year was a $22 billion industry in the United States alone, which is pretty substantial chunk of change floating around here. And so what we're seeing with the professionalization of youth sport, we're really trying to create many successful adults in youth sport. So we're shifting from that idea that everything we sell sport to be, right? So the enormous potential benefits of positive psychological development, physical confidence, social development, quality of your relationships, learning leadership roles, conflict resolution, character, right? A lot of things that are tied to the ethics principles that are internally regulated. We're shifting from that to these extrinsic things, winnings, national rankings, acclaim, championships, right? This is the U12 football ranking. That's going to have an interesting impact on a 12-year-old psychological development. You can look at things like the perfect game and see kiddos as young as 8 years old in Little League with national rankings. Right. And of course, the biggest period of all that's being chased is that elusive college scholarship. One of our ethics principles is transparency, and that's really, really lacking both from individuals that run travel sport clubs, as well as what we're communicating to the kids, right? If that's their dream, great. Be committed, do the hard work, chase that dream, be supported to do it in a healthy way, but also communicate what that really looks like. What are the realistic expectations for that goal, right? 1 to 2% of high school athletes are going to play in college, and most do not play on a full scholarship. And that's really, really missing from that economically. Parents, the average parent pays about $900 per sport per kid per season, but easily pay up to $10,000 or more per season for travel clubs. I think maybe they could save for college tuition instead, and then have a healthier, more well-rounded athlete that has a better likelihood of having a career that's able to extend through college if they don't start playing 11 months out of the year when they're 7, 8, or 9 years old. So a healthy youth sport environment that fosters joy, confidence, and self-worth truly has lifelong health implications. So some of these core pieces of physical competence, social competence, and psychological well-being are developed through youth sport. They really make the blueprint and the imprint for what type of relationship we have with physical activity for the rest of our lives. How many of you have a very unpleasant salient memory of PE as a child? I do. Right, some kids loved it, like play dodgeball, run, and some people, they have a really poor experience, like for me in middle school, like once a week you had to run a mile around the track, and I'm really terrible at running and you don't enjoy it. And in middle school, like you think everyone's staring at you 24/7 is gonna decide what kind of person you are and if they want to be your friend based on how you look 24 hours a day. And that was what I thought. And so I just dreaded it so much, right? And that really carries with us into adulthood. In youth sport, we often have adults who have very high and unrealistic expectations of kids to play, 365, to achieve these things at a young age, and not teaching the character things of sportsmanship and leadership and relationships. There's a lot of abusive sport cultures, especially in youth sport, where kids are humiliated, berated, physically and emotionally abused in the name of sport performance. And that will also stick with them throughout their life. One of the key things that happens, especially for kids about 8 to 16 years old, is building confidence. So we build confidence through mastery attempts. So when we get an opportunity in a safe space to try new skills, to master those skills that are optimally challenging, that are just outside our current comfort zone, that's how we build confidence across domains, whether that's in the classroom, whether that's in sport, whether that's with friends, right? Confidence layers up, and that's what develops our self-worth. Self-worth is absolutely essential to resilience, to success, and to health in the mental health space as we grow, especially as children enter that phase of adolescence and young adulthood, when they are at such risk for developing mental health challenges and psychiatric diagnoses. So the reach is so much farther than the Little League Championship or the college scholarship. It's really pervasive for long-term physical and mental health for individuals and for communities. So shifting a little bit to the ethical perspective, is it as simple as doing what's right in sport? So we're going to think a little bit about that. You can go ahead. So the trouble that we have is specifically in sport, the moral compass is often a moving target. And we use the example of USA gymnastics because it's very well known and it's an enormous one. So first off, in the top left there, we have the difference between Kirby in the 1996 Atlanta Olympics on the women's gymnastics team and Simone Biles, 2021 and the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. In that space of 24 years, right? So USA Gymnastics is notorious. Actually, the sport of gymnastics is notorious for being a very toxic and abusive environment that we now know a lot more about in retrospect. In that space in particular, and across youth sports for the past 100 years, there's been zero autonomy for athletes in a lot of spaces. USA Gymnastics being one of the prime, the worst, right? And so Terry Strug into this idea that we, play through injury, for example, for the glory for the medal for the win, right? We teach this to kids and they see it on TV, they internalize that, right? And it teaches them an unhealthy relationship with their body. It teaches them that they don't have autonomy over their body and mind. They don't listen to the pain cues that their body tells them because the coach says to push through, right? And it very much reduces their opportunities for longevity in sport. Kirby Strug was already came to the Olympics with a lot of injuries, as most Olympic gymnasts have. She did her first vault, fractured her leg pretty substantially. Her ankle, they needed the second vault for the gold medal. So now we know a lot about how abusive the Crowley Empire gymnastics was. So the Crowley said, we need the vault, we need to do the vault. So she got out there, she did the vault on the broken leg, landed it on one foot, and she was instantly an American hero. So we not only, did the sport normalize her to play through that injury, but she was then the best type of hero Americans can hope for in that time. Fast forward to the Tokyo Olympics, Simone Biles pulled out of the Olympics and chose not to compete because she was not in a mental space to be safe. Simone Biles does some of the most dangerous, complicated skills in the sport, some that women in the sport have never done. And if her mental preparation isn't exactly dialed in, she could break her neck, and potentially have a very severe injury. She was experiencing in sports psychology what's called the yips, which is a combination of a neuromuscular condition where your mental state is off. It's sometimes cued by stress, in Simone Biles' case, likely by trauma, but it's both mental and physical. So your neuromuscular pathways, they essentially glitch, right? And your muscles freeze up and you can't execute skills that you have previously automated that you wouldn't need to think about. It's like if suddenly you were walking down a flight of stairs and you glitched and your foot just did the wrong thing and you just stayed down the stairs. You typically don't have to think about it. And for these athletes to execute these skills, they also need to not think about it because they'll get messed up in midair. What happened in between? Well, now we know that in between Kirby Strug and Simone Biles, and even 30 years before that, just pervasive abuse was going on in USA gymnastics. Abuse is able to thrive when there is an environment that does not support athlete autonomy and athlete well-being. The opposite of autonomy is control. So when the athletes have no control over their life, body, or mind, what the coach says goes because they must know better, and that's how we get to the Olympics. It is honestly the perfect breeding ground for predators. And it's not just USA Gymnastics, we've seen it across many national sport governing bodies. USA Gymnastics just got the most coverage for that. And we have here these women who were able to find courage from one another to testify about their trauma and something that was very, very difficult. And then, we still had the audacity to criticize Simone Biles as being not really that great of an American and wasting that Olympic spot because she chose to try to still compete after having just gone through this trial, after having had recent trauma, and she put her well-being as an athlete first, and people felt that that was unacceptable. So what's right in sport hasn't always been very clear. Maybe it was clear to some, but what's right to do has rarely been done for athletes. And slowly with social media, athletes are getting a much better platform to have advocacy and have voice to say what they need to be safe and to be healthy. And the other thing is the USA Gymnastics is very much a youth sports example. That's another important point to keep in mind. Gymnasts are getting a little bit older now, really post Larry Nassar. But previously, gymnasts would, quote, retire at about 16 years old, and they're competing as women gymnasts at the Olympics, which should very much have been called girls gymnastics. And then we might have thought about it a little bit differently if they weren't called women's gymnastics when they were retiring at 16. So as such, youth athletes in this space are especially vulnerable. Go ahead. For a lot of reasons. So we tend to talk about sport and we say like, it's just a game, right? But that's not really the case. Sport has always been a mirror or a microcosm of our society. So what the social norms of our society are often reflected in sports. With the changing moral compass, kind of from my space in sports psychology, in sport, when we say, oh, it's just a game, we often engage in what's called moral bracketing or moral disengagement, right? So if you think about the rivalry language we use in sport, We have a lot of mascots in sport that are either animals or Native American communities. And so that has also offered a layer of dehumanization in sport. Because you're like, let's go kill the Falcons. Right. And so we have a little bit of moral disengagement about the people, the humans in sport that we're going to play in that instant. Right. And so when we teach kids things like using their bodies as a weapon, not taking a pause when their bodies are injured, it kind of revolves around this space where we bracket a little bit of our morals in sport because it's just all part of the game. It's how we do it. It's how it's always been. We have adult-led youth sport. We have a lot of win at all cost mentality, which sacrifices the youth athlete at the end of the day. We have a lot of developmentally inappropriate training, right? So we're training kids with kind of miniature adult methods that's not developmentally appropriate. It's not optimizing their growth and development so that they can be successful in sports in the long term. They're getting a lot of overuse injuries, mental and physical burnout. Sometimes even in club sports, we want them to choose between school activities and club sport time or family time and club sport time. Who's familiar with Tommy John surgery? So Tommy John surgery was made famous by a sports medicine physician who first did it on a baseball player. So it's in the elbow, we have the UCL, the ulnar collateral ligament, which is a common injury, used to be a common injury that tendon would tear in professional MLB baseball pitchers, right? In the past 10 years, we've gone from the average age of the individual getting that surgery being 28, which would be a full-grown professional athlete, to 17, which is a high school athlete. Baseball is one of those year-round travel sports, especially in warm climates. And so not only is the average age of getting your first Tommy John surgery now reduced by 10 years in only a few years, those athletes are likely to have 2 or 3 of those surgeries because they are training at a volume that they haven't grown to be able to sustain yet, physically or mentally. If you read the book The Arm, it's all about Tommy John surgery for both American and Japanese baseball culture. And they interviewed Nolan Ryan, obviously had a very good baseball career. And he says he never threw in volume till he was a full-grown man, right? When he had the shoulder stability, musculature to withstand the training volume. So there is a substantial ethical responsibility for all adults in youth sport to really center athlete autonomy and athlete health and wellness. So just kind of survey, have you ever experienced or observed an ethical dilemma in sport? Is anyone comfortable sharing one?
I don't know, like back in my small town, we had pretty much every year we just had the rec center, the rec club baseball team play against the other rec clubs. But then one year, like some adults started a travel club, and it was kind of for like 12-year-olds. It was kind of like half the 12-year-olds played on the rec team and half played for the travel team, and it kind of made a little rivalry between them. I mean, they're all fine now, but it was kind of like one side of spending a lot of money and going around traveling, and the other side of just having fun with the rec league with the teams from the area.
Yeah, that's a really good example. That's one of the ethical things we discussed in the class that I'm going to talk about is the ethics of the dichotomy we see in American youth sport, right? So that private youth club industry, $22 billion, we have the dichotomy of kids that have no access because we have a pay-to-play system. Even the high school sports are getting pretty pricey these days because school funding is down. And then we have the kids with unlimited access, right? So it's not good for them because they're traveling year-round. They have the money to do it, but they're probably going to burn out. And then we have the kids with no access who have substantial health implications from no access to making friends, to having fun, to being out and engaged in the community. That social connection in your community is actually a huge component of your physical and mental health, even if you're not doing sports. And then that rec funding has gone away because less people are participating because they're doing the travel clubs. So that's a really good example. Go ahead. So I teach undergraduate sport and exercise psychology. So as part of this project, we integrated ethical discussions into class, specifically in our youth sport unit. So the first part of that, I was actually able to build off of some ethical situations that Dr. Jay Coakley had presented as part of our Center for Critical Sport Studies just before COVID. I think it was 2018 or 2019. we had a conversation about ethics in youth sport. So we were able to build up and build off some of those situations. And then what the students did in the class is they were passed out, a bunch of variety of situations with a couple of decision options. And they had to just, develop a justification for what their decision would be in that scenario and why, using those ethics principles in their answer. So why in the frame of these principles would you make this choice? Because the thing is, with an ethical dilemma, right, sometimes there's values and there's philosophy at play. It's not always a clear black or white answer, right, as in the case of abuse. Hopefully that's a very clear black and white answer. Not all of them are. So these are just some examples of things we would discuss. Do you bench your starting player who's been disciplined at school for bullying, right? So this goes into integrity. What is your team culture? What are the expectations of character of your players in and out of your sport? You regularly see a coach berating and humiliating his players, using excessive physical training to quote toughen them up. Do you say something, or do you stay quiet as a parent because you don't want retaliation? You don't want your athletes to lose playing time. We don't hesitate emailing teachers or principals, but we really hesitate talking to the coach because we don't want to mess with the vibe, but we don't want to lose playing time. And that's a very real thing that I hear from youth sport parents. A high school athlete collides with another player, high school state championship, they get up looking a little off balance. Do you pull the player, or do you wait till after the game to get them checked by the doctor? We still see this happen. I have one of my best friends that works next door to me in my office is an athletic trainer. And she's had some very intense, she used to be a head high school athletic trainer, some very intense confrontations with parents that say like, they need to play, and they're like, no, they have a concussion. This is serious. If they get a second hit, like, that brain swelling could be as serious as they could die from that. And they're still like, but it's a game, you gotta come in, like, so it's been pretty serious. So we know, those of us that know concussion research, we know it's extremely serious and shouldn't be messed with, but all you have to do is turn on the NFL to see those examples of when the players go right back in. Parents learn that, kids learn that, and we're not teaching how serious that truly is. Private soccer club requires athletes to travel 11 months out of the year, sells at about 10K a year, which is on the low side. Telling parents this is the only way you're going to get a look from a college recruit. This is an ethical business plan, right? Not always a black and white answer. And then what we did additionally in the class is we ended our unit with a youth sport panel. So we had 4 people on the panel come in from the community. We had a high school athletic trainer. We had a coach, someone representing a coach who coached at both the high school and college level. We had a former athlete who's also now a coach educator. And then we had the very wonderful youth sport parent volunteer coach, right? That's holding both hats. And so it was really, really good. Excellent learning experience for the students, both to they've seen these things, they've experienced them. Most of them have been athletes or are athletes. But then to have and all of these individuals were also athletes themselves, come in and really confirm things that we had learned from a theoretical, ethical, and research perspective, and confirm that it's exactly what is happening in real time in the community as well. And so really what that panel was able to offer us, what is the ethical imperative for youth sport adults, parents, coaches, and anyone else, teachers, anyone involved. Athletes first, athletes before winning, and making sure our athletes retain their voice and their choice. And so we're able also to play off of that, what could some concrete ethics-based recommendations for parents and coaches look like? So I highlighted some of those principles here. For parents, really letting kids choose their activity, right? That's the beginning of enjoyment, value, and autonomy. Let them choose what they sign up for, but then teach them those character things of accountability by making sure they follow through with what they signed up for, right? They might get bored in week 3, but finish out the season, you made a commitment to your team, and then if you choose to move on, that's okay. Never hesitate to advocate for any child in sports whose physical and mental safety is not being prioritized, no matter if they're your kiddo or not. It's extremely important. This ensures viability of the sport and of the kid, their health long term. Teach kids to advocate for their physical and mental safety. It's really important to remember in the youth sport realm that trust and respect is earned for the kids too. Just because you have a whistle around your neck doesn't mean a kid should automatically respect you or trust you, right? That has to be earned. There should be a trusted relationship established through reciprocity. We should respect the kids for their autonomy and their freedom and their rights just as much as we would another adult. And parents should, think a little bit more about, just what coach says goes and really protect those children. Teach integrity through sportspersonship, not gamespersonship. Gamespersonship is seeing just what you can get away with that isn't quite breaking the rules, right? Like, oh, the ref didn't see the penalty, like those kinds of things. Like teaching real integrity and sportspersonship is really important. There's a great example recently in the NHL, as player Kel McCarr, skating down middle ice, fell, ref called a trip. He was skating with another player and he got up and goes, it wasn't a trip, I actually fell. So, right, NHL level, like that is like perfect, easy example of like what does character and integrity look like at the highest level, because it would have been just as easy to go with a trip, give the penalty, maybe score an extra goal for your team. Be transparent. What are the realistic expectations for kids in sport, and give them unconditional love. Don't focus our praise and attention on the outcomes kids bring home in performances, whether those are academic or sport. Just give them unconditional love and ask if they're having fun, no matter what they're involved with and no matter how they perform. For coaches, really being transparent. If we can't probably let the 8-year-old be in charge of the team, right? But if we're able to tell them the whys, that allows them to still have a piece of autonomy. So they're like, oh, okay, I understand why we're doing this. And not just like, I said so. That really helps with autonomy. Respect that every athlete has autonomy over their body and mind. So when they say that they need a break, they need a break. It's not your job to decide if they need a break. Encourage them to work hard, but if they say we need a break, we just honor that. Role model integrity, right? We see lots of coaches at every developmental level losing their minds and not demonstrating integrity, self-control that we ask children to have. Grounding team culture in fairness and respect, and really ensuring accountability is enforced based on the character of the team for all players. Same for the starters, same for the bench players. And that you got to bench a starter player because they are breaking the team rules and expectations and it's the championship. That's a natural consequence of life, and that should be taught sooner than later. Give kids as many choices as possible. Let them pick the team shirt color. Let them pick what kind of juice they have at practice, like those kinds of things. Choices really help with the buy-in and the excitement and the identity of the team. And hold your fellow peer coaches accountable for athlete well-being as well.
So I think this is fascinating. And so 2 things. You talked about the sportspersonship, and I have had business ethics class, and we tend to have a lot of student athletes.
Yeah.
And so I'll actually pose to them, hey, what would happen in a game if you stepped out of bounds, you knew it, the ref didn't see it, and then you went up to the ref and said, hey, I stepped out of bounds. And they all go, our coaches would kill us. I mean, they're just laughter throughout the class of that's what the refs are there for. That's their job, right? And so it's a really interesting dichotomy there when we're talking about character and integrity, and yet within the confines of the game, it's like, well, that's the ref's job to figure out if there's a penalty or something. The other unrelated piece is, so I've had kids go through high school athletics, and I think we've done a pretty good job as parents of not doing the things that you're talking about there. But what I've seen is the coaches, right? There's sort of these perverse incentives where I've heard a lot of coaches in high school talk about, yeah, we want to develop athletes' character and their integrity and all those kinds of things, but they're rewarded for winning. And you talked about, the kids that develop earlier getting more attention. Both my kids were late bloomers. They're 6'4" and 6'3" now as college kids, but they were small as freshmen in high school and didn't get those opportunities. So I wonder if you have any thoughts on how you can, the things you listed there for coaches, how can you get that instilled into the system, into the process, to where coaches are actually paying attention to those character development things as opposed to just having a winning team?
We have 3 more hours.
Right.
So I love the question. It's the best question, my favorite question. This is what I do all day, every day, both in my teaching, my research, and my community work. So we actually had a 6 a.m. meeting today with research collaborators in the UK, and we're coding interviews on coach education norms for national governing bodies, specifically about eating disorders and red. But the central point that's related is in the United States, we have the reason that kids don't get the best optimal development. The reason that sport has been a breeding ground for predators is because there's no national governing body that standardizes professionalization for coaches, right? So especially at the most important developmental levels with middle school and high school, right? You go to Europe, Canada, they really understand the importance of that early athlete development and doing it well, and will put some of their best qualified coaches at the youngest levels. But we have primarily a volunteer system. And even as coaches progress up, it's kind of like still a lot of good old boys club, right? Kind of who you know, like you hire your friend, or we think that the best athletes will make the best coaches. Coaching has nothing to do really with the sport, right? It's about teaching the character, communication, relationship building. How do you motivate people, right? It comes from the Latin, like how do you move people? So huge variability or total lack of coach training, right? If you're a parent coach, you don't know what you don't know sometimes, right? And so that is a huge thing at every level, up and down, to have quality coach training in what's appropriate development. How do you create a healthy motivational climate? It starts with a lot of things you mentioned. Rewarding effort over outcome. That's like number one. And that's some of the things I do with coach education across governing bodies as well as with our coach here at UCCS, right? So sometimes it takes a lot more time and intention to create those practice plans where you reward effort that's known and expected. It's what you talk about, it's what you speak to. John Wooden, how many of you are familiar with John Wooden? Right, he was one of the greatest legacy coaches for college basketball. He was an English teacher, specifically in poetry by trade. He coached no less than 10 nearly back-to-back NCAA basketball titles for UCLA. Not back when you got paid millions of dollars and you got paid a teacher's salary to do so. But he says, and his players confirmed, such as Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, confirmed that he never spoke about winning. He could care less. Sometimes he just sat at the top of the bleachers during games because he knew like that was just time to demonstrate what you worked on. Like you worked hard, now go show what you've done. And I'm not worried about the score. I'm worried that you show up on time, that you're dressed well, that you're respectful, that you're not cursing, and that you show up and give 100% of whatever you have every day. And then the score will be what the score is. And he was still today one of the most decorated and successful coaches of all time. And that was precisely his mantra. The other thing is about centering athlete well-being. If you keep your athletes enjoying, happy with quality relationships, they will perform better. Athletes may appear to be performing great, getting the crap beat out of them all the time in practice, but you're leaving points on the table because they could be better if they were healthy and if they were happy and if they had quality relationships with each other and with the coach versus like the common enemy is the coach. I don't know if that helps you.
That's great. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, and the talent development too, if we had another 5 hours, like with your kiddos, age group is one of the worst ways to do sport. Even in the 9th grade, for example, you've still got an 11-month plus or minus, plus the plus or minus 5 years of when we're going to hit puberty. Right. So having one integrated youth sport with girls and boys playing together until puberty, that gives everybody more opportunities, everybody better coaching, everybody challenging each other. And then as we start in the puberty at all different times, we start splitting off into skill groups. So the late matures aren't getting cut. The early matures can move on, everyone gets more coaching. Your talent development pool explodes. That would be like another lot of hours, but one of my favorite topics. Yeah.
So this might not be fully on the same topic, but what do you do in multi-child households with where one child is more like a star performer and the others are being pushed into sports because they have one star athlete?
Yeah.
And that mentality.
Well, I think nothing because it depends on the parents too. The parent questions are always my hardest question. But it really just comes down to unconditional love, right? Give children opportunity for extracurricular activities that are challenging, but their choice, right? So my husband and I both met over our mutual love of college sports, and we met at the rec center here at UCCS actually when I worked there. And we met kind of around, and we love sports and being active and stuff. So far, both of our daughters are not interested in sports, and that's totally how the cookie crumbles, right? My older daughter, she's 11 now, she zoomed through swim lessons and they put her in pre-swim. She's very long and lean, she's a really strong swimmer, like she literally like swim like a mermaid with like little effort. So they really want her on the swim team. She tried it for about maybe 5 or 6 weeks or so. She's really lean, so she gets really cold in the pool. And they, what do you think they tell her when she's cold?
Suck it up.
Some harder.
They're like, it's like, Mom, I swam the whole time and I was breathing the whole time. And then she very much knows how she wants to direct her life and from. But she's like, I want to take a break. I'm just gonna take a break. Like versus the coach is like, you have to keep going a certain number of laps without a break, right? And so she's like, she did her 6 weeks and she's like, because they have to finish whatever they sign up for despite the whining. And she didn't want to do it. But I can only imagine if I was a parent that needed her to do that so I could feel successful as a parent or wanted her to be like other siblings. I can imagine how mentally unhealthy she would be if I was like, no, you're gonna love it. Just trust me. You're gonna thank me later. You're gonna love it. She would just be so miserable. They both have really enjoyed theater. So they've done theater performances since she was 4. So it's another type of achievement domain that's very challenging, challenges the body and mind, and that's the space they find enjoyment, and that's okay. So yeah.
Okay, so I have a follow-up to that question, which is that how about the opposite scenario where I have 2 teenagers, where it's the child that really wants to do the competitive team and wants to travel and work, I think more than not work more, but just keep branching it up.
Yeah, there's
So as a parent, how do you respond to that? Because we're currently having these conversations where I'm like, you're 14. Like, it's okay. Like, you'll have opportunities, but when or does it make sense to invest in more competitive leagues and all that stuff?
What sport do you mean?
Volleyball.
Yeah. So there's very few sports aside from typically gymnastics, figure skating, and diving that truly require early specialization. And even then we really misnomer what specialization means. So if you look at like the world definition of specialization, it means that you kind of slowly move towards having what they call a signature activity, but that never means you get rid of your complementary activities. So I think for those kiddos, like that's great. Like they have that passion, they love it. Really help them foster it. Just help them to do it safely. So sometimes you have to step in to offer balance when it's needed, even if they don't like it, because they might have a coach that's being like, you take a break, you're gonna lose this opportunity. And that's not true. They've done a lot of really good surveys and research with professional athletes and college athletes. The majority are almost always multi-sport athletes, not single sport athletes. And they made it that far because they were multi-sport athletes. So really encouraging a complementary sport that's like an off season. So say fall is volleyball, that's your crazy go-to competitive season. Maybe in spring you play like rec volleyball, maybe if you like really can't get away. And then summer, like either having an off season or something else, right? Because those sports skills transfer amongst sports. You don't lose your volleyball skills because you play basketball, you get more athletic, right? You get more agility, you see the game better, you get good communication skills, they transfer. And so just making sure that they have rest recovery. If they're going to choose to practice that hard and go that hard, then they've also got to commit to the sleep and the hydration and the nutrition as part of the responsibility of having that big time goal. Yes. Not easy, actually.
I have 2 things. One thing, I actually had a son who was like in 4 sports and excelled with all of them. And we had to actually financially couldn't keep up with all of them. So had to have a discussion about, how to, what is the ones that we enjoy the most and we could afford. So that is one issue. And also time, because hockey practice was like
the worst
11 o'clock at night for a middle schooler.
Yeah.
So that was the only time you had ice time, and so we had a lot of discussions. My other question to you though is back to your classroom and your students. How did they respond to talking about it in ethics and framing it with the initiative principles? And do you feel, did you get any feedback from them about the approaches that you took?
I think they really enjoyed it. I think the students today, like, you know, just one generation and removed from some of what we've seen happen in sport, they really get it. Like, it wasn't hard for them to do. Like, you know, some of it was the situations were complex and they were difficult, and they were like, well, you know, we couldn't decide between the two. But it was pretty smooth, and I think it was really a fulfilling learning opportunity for them to have a framework to discuss things that they've seen or maybe wrestled with or seen done not right, and kind of be able to write that with a framework to work around. So I think overall they really enjoyed it, and seeing those things reiterated by the community panel, I think was the most impactful learning.
Good question. So you were talking about some of them specializing gymnastics, those. When or is there a good flyer system, something to give them that top level expectations? So if they are at U Sports thinking about moving into some of the competitive aspects, they understand some of those things. Because doing something at a very high level, we have a sports psychologist, we have a nutritionist, all of those things are afforded to us.
Yeah.
But they're not at that lower level. And so that's sometimes when do they know that or is appropriate?
Yeah,
Be assisted.
Yeah, I think you can start teaching those things from the very beginning, and that's kind of, I think, my life's mission to, you know, how far can we back those resources up, right? Because think about the game changing for, like, if you're like, how competitive can the United States be on the global stage for sport? If we started teaching kids when they try sport at 8 about nutrition and hydration, and if their body feels good and if their mind feels good, positive mindset, goal setting, emotional regulation, emotional intelligence, that is a light years apart situation when they become 25, than trying to teach it in the world-class athlete program when you have 20 years of bad habits, probably, or at least some, right? So that's like my driving mission and all my work is like, you know, now I'm working with college athletes, but still they've had 10 plus years of socialization. 30 to 40% of our athletes on campus this year said that they would hesitate to ask for help because they're afraid how they would be viewed by their teammates and coach, and if they would be viewed as a weakness or a liability, right? From that previous socialization, whether it's from TV, from parents, from coaches, from school. So we have lots and lots of road to travel, but the more we back those resources up, kids can understand these concepts and they can put them into practice. I actually did a talk for a little tiny Manitou swim club of 9-year-olds, and we did like breathing and meditation. We talked about like how they feel nervous for a race, and like they can understand these concepts and they can integrate them. And it has to be automated like the sport skills, right? Baseball players don't think a lot about giving the ball a toss unless they develop the gifts, because it's automated. And mental skills need to be automated, or else when you come to stress, adversity, mental crisis, you won't use them. So the more we can back those people up or start them there, then you don't need them when you get higher.
I kind of have 2 questions related. So are there any countries that have done a good job of, you know, developing like a framework for youth sports and de-emphasizing specialization? And then also, are there any possible ways to implement that here in the US? Because, you know, talking volleyball and stuff, these organizations, you don't really have a choice. Like you play in the fall in high school, and then if you want to club, it's the entire rest of the year. I mean, and it may be controlled by different organizations in different states or something, but is there any way that those regulations could come down into those entities? You know?
Totally could. First, we need an entity, right? So most other countries have like a sport ministry, right? That's a national sport body. We have primarily a lot of decentralized governing bodies, so it's just all over the place. And what we found in these coach interviews, we're asking what are the coach education curriculums for USA swimming, track and field, sports that are pretty high eating disorder and Red's concern. And they're like, well, we have no policy, we make recommendations, and leave it up to the coaches to know what's best for their team. The coaches without any standardized training or curriculum know what's best. Also, there's lots of other countries that do a great job. In a lot of the, for example, like UK soccer league, like down through their developmental pathways, they do a pretty good job comparatively. They at least have an intentional developmental plan. They use an evidence-based long-term athlete development framework. We are also typically in the minority of countries that do sport-based in schools versus communities, so that's another piece. But parents really get to vote by where they send their money, and so that's a piece of it. What gets funded, you know, like advocating for funding to be redistributed into the community to reinvigorate recreational leagues for community engagement, not just for the kids, but for adults, so that we all don't keep driving home to our driveways in our garages and shutting them and do Netflix and chill, and then that increased community breakdown and social isolation affects everybody's health. So if parents keep paying it, they'll keep offering it.
I know in soccer, and our son was involved with the pro teams are actually having youth programs as well. So that's another element that.
So in the US, USA Hockey actually does a really good job. They're one of the few governing bodies to consistently do long-term athlete development. They have some great videos. For example, they did scaled up hockey rink for adults. So they took a hockey rink and made it as big as it would be for like 8-year-olds and had adults play on it so that they like understand what, right? And they do a lot of like cross-ice, corner-ice games. So we're increasing the number of touches to have developmentally appropriate training. So USA Hockey is probably one of the shining examples of our governing bodies that do it well, I would say. So is there any online questions?
I have another question. And a kind of a comment, because, I mean, you mentioned how accessibility is so important, particularly in school sports.
Yeah.
But, I mean, so my kids are in D20 and, there's been a shortage of bus drivers. So our athletes did not get buses to the games. And, you know, my husband and I have flexible schedules. We both teach at university. But I'm just like, how do we have to pick the kids up and take them wherever their games are and then, you know, wait and bring them back? And it just creates a whole barrier for parents that have like a 9-to-5 job or that can't like just drop what they're doing for like, you know, 3 hours. I guess we could have done a little bit better job at doing carpooling situations. I know parents work that out.
Takes a lot more time.
We can't give you the other parents' contacts.
Yep.
You're like running around. Anyways, I think that's such a important piece.
Yeah, the equity is enormous.
It's huge, right? And then on the flip side of it, you're talking about the college athletes, and I know so in the arts and in music, for example, there's this whole concept of like lifelong learning, lifelong musicianship. And I don't know how many intramural sports we have here at UCCS, but it seems like that should be a whole other kind of investment for like the university, the community, like lifelong, like, you know, activity.
I've been trying to reinvigorate faculty and staff volleyball since COVID. Let me know. I am available. I can sneak on this team sometimes. No, but actually the rec center does have offered pretty robust intramural. Yeah, they do. They do a great job.
Okay, my question is also about access and my big fear, and I have kids and sports scare me, and I loved them and I hated them and it was great, it was awful. And somehow I'm coaching my kids fun. And I want you to come.
Yeah.
Just tell the parents what's going on. So my question about access is so much of what you discussed is like, this is a really unhealthy environment often. And there's this equity problem, there's a disparity in access. And then my question becomes, what are we trying to then provide access to? Like if we're trying to provide access to this unhealthy environment that will burn you out physically and mentally and cause power trauma, and that like there's an ethical dilemma there. In are we trying to provide access to a thing that's actually harming a lot of children and young adults? So that's my ethical question, I guess.
Yeah, we need both, right? So we need quality coaches. The coaches absolutely every time ultimately will determine the health outcomes and the experience outcomes of the athlete. That's the first thing my athletes are telling me, like, what about the coaches? Don't just teach me how to be healthy, make sure you teach the coaches too. So we need the coach education, we need the standardization, we need professionalization and accountability, but we absolutely need spaces, even if there's just a babysitter, like we need community facilities and resources that are not run down and dilapidated that like can bring parents and kids out to connect, communicate, and enjoy moving their bodies and forming relationships. And they don't even have to have a coach. So you need both. Absolutely.
Do you then work with, say, your CHASA to really recommend and push things, and do they take them well?
That's a good question. That is a body I haven't worked with yet. That would be. And I'm actually less familiar. I had a lot of intersections with the NGVs, but less familiar with what the CHASA coaching policies look like. But I know a lot of teachers coach. So they at least have a little more accountability and, you know, background checks and things like that. But I'm not sure what their policies look like. That's a great app.
So I appreciate the concerns, the abuse side, the negative aspects. But how do we balance? How do we make sure that the pendulum doesn't swing too far to where now we're not challenging the athletes and we're not pushing them, right? And I mean, I can think about basic training experiences that I went through, and some of them were abusive, right? And we've worked to kind of clean that up. But at the same time, there were certainly some beneficial things of pushing people to places they've never been before, right? Challenging them. So I always get concerned that when we try to respond to the abusive nature of this, that we would swing too far and then become like, oh, you scraped your elbow, why don't you take 2 weeks off? Or, those sorts of things, right? So.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, because that is there's so much space in between, right? And that because sports has been the land of like, tough it up.
Yeah.
That is such, especially from an older school of thought from coaching, is like, everybody's gonna get soft. And you hear this all the time in news everywhere. Like, we can't be soft. Like, what's the point? Absolutely. So there's so much space in between those two ends of the spectrum. And in my professional opinion, yes, optimal challenge is essential to growing successful people in every sector. However, resilience, which is hopefully our goal, is only developed through support. We might develop resilience without support, but that's attached to trauma. So resilience with support is what builds that strong character that we're looking for. So it's all about how the expectations of the team are set up, and how it's presented, right? So for example, one of my least favorite points of advice for coaches is do not use physical training as punishment. Physical training is your bread and butter to condition your athletes to be better. And it's your choice how you frame it. If your team is out of shape, then just tell them that. Like, we have a long road to go. We're going to do a lot of extra conditioning. It's going to be really hard. You might not love me every day, but we're going to support one another. And I promise you we'll get through it. And we're going to be a better team for it at the end of the day. You're going to get your same outcome, but you weren't standing there being like, you guys are pieces of crap. I'm embarrassed by you. Get on the line. Let's run until I feel like going to med school. It's just a little bit of framing and intention, same modality and same goal, but totally changes the psychological state of the team cohesion, and they will have better performance. So uniting around something is really hard, but knowing that you support them and have them their best interests at heart, and this is why we're doing it, then absolutely that challenge is so important. But it's so missed. Like, we either just have tough or soft. Those are our options. There's so much we can do in the middle, and we can be so successful. So yeah.
I just want to say that I appreciate everything you said today, because like so many things have like clicked that I can relate to. This swim lessons, my kids did their month of pre-team, and then they were like, nope.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. And the same thing with, if you commit to, paying for a period of, a season or whatever, you're going to finish it even if you hate it. And I saw in my own family growing up that didn't happen. And I definitely wanted to turn that around for my kids and say, look, if we sign up for a session, you're doing the session. And I also appreciate, like, my kids are not competitive athletes. And at times I've wondered, should I be pushing them to do a team? My son goes to parkour once a week, loves it, does not want to compete. I even talked about it last night. He's like, nope, I just like doing tricks. It's fun. It's cool. And my daughter just has never found her sport, but she just piloted a raft almost 68 miles over spring break. And, so maybe rowing is her thing. And it's good to be able to try those things out and not have to be like ultra competitive. And I just tell my kids, as long as you're physically active and, you know, healthy, that's what it's about.
Yeah, and like we talked about specialization, 8 to 12 years old is what we call the sampling year. Just letting kids try as many activities as possible so they can figure out what they enjoy, where they find fulfillment. And then still in sport, 12 to 16, you can start trying more competitive settings, but you're really not getting into that like signature commitment, high competitive and like 16 plus. So yeah, like it's called the sampling years, literally, even in the research, because that's the idea. Like, because who knows, like it takes a while to find your love, things that bring you joy.
Definitely seems like this topic resonates with people, and knowing Spencer too. And, you know,
Yeah, I'm surprised
people that work
Spencer
with
didn't have
athletes,
any questions.
I think he might have. But anyway, I can see that this topic could fit in so many different courses. You know, it doesn't need to be, you know, the health sciences one, right? I mean, because you have business management and nursing and history, the history of sport.
Yeah, that's true of the Olympics a lot.
Yeah. I mean, so I think that again, because you know, sometimes people say the topic, you know, doesn't fit. I think it's great. I mean, I think sport, especially youth sports, everybody's got stories, right? And I really like discussions.
Oh, thank you. The discussion was wonderful. That's why you go for it. Sometimes you get crickets and then you're like, what? I could do it again. So yeah, no, it's excellent. And with the equity piece, I mean, it couldn't be more important, right? We want, in 20 years, I want everyone to have as much experiences to share with one another about their sport experiences as you all have now. And expanding that access is going to be critical. And I will say as a parent, the competition with technology, it is hard to motivate your kids who don't know what they're interested in yet to get off of a device, especially my 8-year-old tomorrow started kindergarten on an iPad. And so it's a different world, and competing with the lure of technology is freaking hard, even for someone that knows all the things and knows why it's important. So that's going to also be a huge piece of access and equity and funding and engagement, right? Because if nobody shows up, they say nobody wants to do it. And so we have a program. And so it's a lot of things at play. And so my greatest hope is that everyone will have those experiences in a few decades from now and not just on Fortnite.
Can I ask Brayden to explain a little bit? You're going to do, the PTA program has internships, and so does our sport management program. They have internships. A lot of them go to governing bodies. I know that golf has a huge youth program, you know, for trying to encourage people to go into golf. So you're going to do a Daniels Fund Ethics Initiative type program for ethics for an internship. Can you explain or kind of think about how this discussion could influence some of the topics that you go over?
Well, I mean, my topics were going to be more of like using our privileges that we get on internship and whatnot, but I could see this going into like junior golf, because I mean, I played junior golf for a couple of years. I wanted to be a college golfer, and so I had to figure out that I wasn't good enough. And the PGA is way better than being a college golfer for me. So I'm happy I wasn't good enough to be a college golfer. But anyways, like in junior golf, there's like pretty much a lot of the guys I played with, they're all from, you know, the city. I came from the country on a crappy 9-hole track. So all these guys are at the country club every day with parents that pay for all their clubs and whatnot.
I was about to say there's a lot of not accessing golf.
Yeah, like but thankfully the Colorado PGA section and the Colorado Golf Association gave me a lot of financial aid so I could actually play in the tournaments. So I think maybe talking about like funding and the expenses that some junior golfers would have, because I know like for me, I didn't have access to lessons at all because there's no PGA pros out where I live. But even if there was PGA pros, a lot charge pretty expensive rates, and you know some kids can't afford that. And that's honestly one of my goals also is like be a PGA pro out in the rural area. And I want to just, if there's kids like me that want to get to a high level of golf, I want to teach them for no charge, like I can charge some adults expensive rates, but I don't really want to charge some kid that's just trying to reach his dream,
Yeah, and in that vein, it's a little bit encouraging. I talk about this a lot in classes, but Chicago is one of the biggest sports cities. They are actually opening a mega sport complex soon for youth sports, but it's going to have 20 hours a week of free youth sports for anybody in the community, as well as the high level travel clubs, as well as a lot of professional athletes coming and offering coaching to balance that equity. Because otherwise you see a lot of poor kids in medical exercise programs for obesity, which couldn't be more miserable for those kids. So that is opening soon in Chicago, and that is a really good example of the model we need in our communities. Some of that $20 billion, chunk it off and spread the literal and metaphorical wealth for children. Questions? Thank you for listening and engaging. I really appreciate you all.
Thank you all for coming. Just to let you know, the next roundtable is going to be on May 4th, and it's at lunchtime. And it's about training for internship and practical supervisors. So stay tuned to that. You'll get that information in a follow-up email. Thank you, and have a great day.
I got it, my.
Those are you.
Can you end the meeting so excited?
Outdoor ethics champions from the Southern Colorado Ethics Fellows, which are faculty and staff. So take a look at those, as well as ethics ambassadors. If you need, if you have a student that you think that